looking specifically to digital tools in agriculture, right? And I think there's a number of different channels by which digital tools can really improve agricultural development. And so this is just a number of examples around revolutionizing farmer organizations, really encouraging farmers to interact with each other around best practices, empowering rural women and youth, lowering the barriers and distance to markets, revamping extension models, and then improving feedback loops. And we'll talk about some of the specific tools that demonstrate some of these impacts. One of the things I did want to share at a micro level too is the fact that there are still a lot of areas where there's very little connectivity. And one of the interesting efforts that we've supported essentially is with colleagues of yours. You're here at University of the Philippines, but colleagues of yours at UP Diliman, where essentially there are a number of undergrads in the Philippines that have no access to even basic telephony, like 2G access. And so what this group at UP Diliman is doing with other partners such as UC Berkeley and other places is they're actually extending connectivity out to remote fishing villages off the coast of Aurora. And what's very exciting about this particular effort is that it's the first randomized control trial of what happens when you extend basic 2G services or basic communication services out to communities. And so this RCT is pairing villages that are getting access to 2G services to others that are not, and then basically measuring the socioeconomic impacts of basic connectivity. There's a lot of other interesting things happening here. We can go into the details, but the equipment that they're using is open source hardware and software that could really revolutionize the telecommunications. Now, when you think about constraints to digital tool adoption, there's a number of issues to really consider, particularly as you go to market or you go to communities with these tools. And so I wanted to cover a couple of these constraints. And the first is really access and adoption of digital technology. And so what you're looking at here is a chart of unique mobile subscribers as a percentage of the population. So this gets to more of a true picture of how many people in a particular geography actually have a mobile phone. And so if you take a look at the world, the number for the world is around 67, 68, and then 68% of the population are actually mobile subscribers. And you go from a high of around 85 or so all the way in Europe, in North America, all the way down to Sub-Saharan Africa, where the number is more around 43, 44. So, and if you look at countries in the region, you can see the Philippines in red here is at 63%. So this is the percentage of the population of the Philippines that have at least a basic mobile phone. And you see some comparisons with other countries in the region, from Myanmar at 49% up to Malaysia at 79%. And the number for Myanmar actually is really interesting because that's a market that just really opened up just in the last few years when it comes to telecommunications services, and that number is already at 50%. So one big constraint around digital tools, the digital tool adoption and the dissemination of digital tools that you're working on is really access. It means your target beneficiaries, the population that you're trying to reach, do they actually have mobile phones? Another big constraint is the big gap between urban and rural, and the big differences in terms of adoption between urban and rural. And so what you're taking a look at here is essentially on the right-hand side is a depiction of urban populations and GSM coverage. And GSM is just basic 2G telephony. So that's on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, you see rural coverage. So rural coverage around 60% for basic 2G services versus urban populations that are more around 88%. But another interesting thing to point out here is that coverage and access to mobile telephony is greater than actual access to other basic access. Another constraint to digital tool adoption globally is the fact that when you talk now about internet usage, right? Before we're talking about basic 2G services, basic telephony adoption. But when you talk and think about internet usage, the higher data throughput, the apps and services that drive over data, what we see, at least at a global level, is that internet user growth is slowing. And this is actually older data, and the numbers have slowed down even since I put this particular chart together. But essentially, what you see in the bar charts in the blue, that's the total number of internet users worldwide. Right? So that's the left-hand side of this chart. You can see the increase in 2016 was forecasted to be around 3.5 billion or so, and that number maintains around that level. In the red line is the growth rate, the annual growth rate, and essentially the growth rate of internet users has been slowing over time. Part of it is the law of large numbers because you have a higher base, but part of it too is the fact that a lot of the easier to reach populations already have access to the internet, and it's more difficult to connect to the remaining 3.5 billion. Another constraint to digital tool adoption is really around limited network availability and affordability. So what you're looking at here, essentially in the blue, is a graphical depiction of the 4.2 billion non-internet users globally, and that's segmented between two main groups. The first main group is really around individuals who are covered by 3G access, right? So 3G being data access. So that's 2.6 billion people worldwide who are within the footprint of 3G telephony, but they're not participating in the digital economy. And then you have another group, 1.6 billion people who are not even within the footprint of 3G access. And so the constraints here are different. For the 2.6 billion people covered by 3G but are not subscribers, one of the biggest constraints there is around the costs of service, around the cost of hardware, around the cost of participating online. And then the other group is really, 1.6 is really around the fact that you have limited mobile network coverage in a lot of the world. So when we think about how to assess a national digital ecosystem, there are a lot of tools out there that have been produced by the global community. The ITU, the United Nations, puts together an ICT development index. The World Economic Forum puts together a network readiness index that we've participated in, and then also with the Broadband Commission, there are a number of different tools like this Planning for Progress report that we put out a few years ago. What I wanted to do to talk about the situation in the Philippines was to use the Inclusive Internet Index, which is produced by the Economist Intelligence Unit with Facebook, because it has some of the most timely data, and I think helps to depict the situation in the Philippines very clearly. So if you look at how the Philippines measures within the Inclusive Internet Index, the Philippines places about 54th out of about 86 countries overall. And so it's in the lower half of the standings for Asia. It's 9th out of 23 lower middle income countries. And if you look at really where the sort of strengths and the weaknesses are in the digital ecosystem here in the Philippines, you see that in red, the Philippines ranks quite poorly when it comes to affordability of service, affordability of devices, and then also in the competitive environment. Right? So the competitive environment includes the fact that the telecom market really is dominated by too many players here in the Philippines. On the strength side, you see the Philippines ranking 38 out of 86 when it comes to literacy and digital literacy skills, and then also on trust and safety. Trust and safety, we'll dive into that, but it really has to do with the confidence that people have in participating online. And you see that in the Philippines being one of the leaders in terms of social media by the population. So really, the challenges when it comes to the digital ecosystem in the Philippines tend to be on the supply side. It tends to be on the infrastructure, it tends to be on the extension of networks. And what you're looking at here in the chart really is a graphical depiction of the quality of self-service in the Philippines. And I'm sure this isn't a surprise to many of you, right? Because you go out, even here on the side of the Manila sometimes for service. But you go out into rural areas and there's very little or no signal when it comes to basic. And so, you know, if you look at the number of barangays that don't have any cellular coverage, some estimates point to about a quarter, close to a quarter of barangays don't have cellular service. And then a lot of that also stems from the fact that there are other infrastructure challenges related to those barangays around grid power and being quite geographically isolated. Going into the other supply side challenges around competition and affordability, this just drills down a little bit deeper into the data from the Inclusive Internet Index around wireless operators market concentration. Over here on the left, ranking 66 out of 86 countries. That has to do with the essentially the duopoly that we see in the Philippines. And then also price of services in the Philippines, ranking 51st out of 86 countries. You can take a look at some of the rankings around smartphone costs on handsets, mobile phone costs on tariffs, both prepaid, postpaid, and then also the cost of fixed monthly broadband subscription. So this all leads to a limited subscriber base, and this is data that was put out by the Asian Foundation a couple of weeks ago around the limited subscriber base, with only 45% of the population, or 45% of the population having no internet access, 61% of households having no internet access, and 74% of public schools having no internet access. And that's really quite a significant number when you think about the importance of communications technologies and access to information in an educational context. What I did want to point out, though, was the sort of demand side strengths. And I think this is something to consider when you're thinking about digital tools, the development of digital tools, the delivery of digital tools, really around the strengths on the ability to utilize these tools, familiarity by the population, the trust that people have in participating online, whether it's in government offices or NGOs. So that's something to think about there. So what this means is that the government of the Philippines is really focused on a supply side approach to supporting digital ecosystem development in the Philippines. And so if you take a look at elements of the Department of ICT's National Broadband Plan, they're really focused on the expansion of internet infrastructure in the country. So there's a number of interesting things that are happening around increased capacity, more national fiber backbone, a new telco that is going to be announced shortly. I think today was the last day. Tomorrow is the last day for the bid for the new telco, and then connectivity to all the barangays and satellite over there. So just to touch a little bit on the role of ICTs in agriculture. I know a lot of you in the room are working on this particular topic. I mean, I put up the definition early on in the presentation around ICTs, but there's a lot of different ICTs to think about when you're thinking about how you reach farmers, work with farmers, work with agricultural extension agents. And so this is just a sampling of different ICTs that are out there. And if you think about the different groupings of digital agriculture endeavors, you can really segment around sort of knowledge repositories, e-learning, intelligent agriculture. You can just go around and really see different ways to engage digital tools. One of the ways that we've thought about where digital plays a role in the agricultural value chain is basically by taking a look at where and why it can make sense to try and digitize the value chain. So this is some work that was originally done by my colleagues within the Digital Development for the Future, the U2S program at USAID, really trying to articulate, okay, from planning through inputs to on-farm production to post-harvest to access to markets, where exactly can digital tools play a role in supporting the agricultural value chain, and the sort of different types of tools, right, from data collection, transactions, information exchange, risk management, etc. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time, maybe share with you a few different examples of digital tools from colleagues here in the area. You take a look at, so there's different types of tools, right? There's information support tools, there's decision support tools, and there's sort of a whole suite of service tools. And so Rice Knowledge Bank is one example of information support tool that by area that has a range of resources around rice production. There's decision support tools, right? So rice crop manager, rice doctor, and my colleagues at here can go into this in much more depth. And then there's examples of ICTs for integrated services. So InfoLadies in Bangladesh around basically working with young women to reach remote villages with the provision of health, agriculture, and IT services. And then there's others such as brigade and farm related. I just wanted to talk a little bit about considerations when it comes to the development of digital tools in agriculture. And I think one of the things that we have seen a lot at USAID is that we get pitched a lot of really great ideas, a lot of really great apps, or a lot of really great services that are trying to solve a problem, but they have other issues that have not necessarily been thought through. So there's, of course, there's content, and there's also capacity of the users if you're trying to actually reach a particular target group. And so the capacity to throw that information, to actually have the tools to be able to access the information, whether it's on a data-driven application that requires 3G service, do they have the 3G and do they have the service to be able to access that information? And then, of course, sustainability, right? So cost and cost recovery. We see this a lot where people develop really interesting apps and tools, and they seem to be developed for a subsidized, a perpetually subsidized donor environment, as opposed to really building in a cost recovery plan, right? Is it user fees? Is it an ad-supported model? Is there something else that can really drive the sustainability and scale of the tool itself? And then connectivity. Connectivity is the big one that I focus a lot of time on. And then also wanted to share with you, particularly if you're creating digital tools. I know there's computer science students right here who are creating digital tools. One of the things that was put together by the development community, really driven by foundations such as the Gates Foundation and the donor community, bilateral donors and multilateral donors, is these principles for digital development. And I think the real impetus for putting together a robust set of principles when you're trying to create digital tools is because of some of the challenges that we've seen around the proliferation of application services that then just peter out. Or in worst case scenarios, there was an example of the government of Uganda in 2013, basically suffering from pilotitis of digital tool development, right? Basically saying no more digital tools, no more digital services. We need to figure out everything that's going on here. And so these principles for digital development were really designed to ensure that as whomever developing digital tools within the international development context really takes into account these principles so that you really see robust dissemination and uptake of these tools. So, you know, there's a lot of content if you double-click into each one of these principles, but essentially these are very common sense things. But if the goal that you have as a app developer is to really try and reach scale or obtain funding or adoption, I think these are the principles to really take into account with the tools that you guys are developing. So I wanted to point you guys to my wife, Carolyn Flores, who's right there. Right? So, you know, it's interesting. Carolyn and I met at the World Bank in 2005, 2006. But we both worked on this topic, right? We both worked on digital development. We are sort of two sides of the same coin, though. I focus very much more on policy level and focus on issues. Carolyn, in our household, is really the true expert when it comes to actual digital tool development. And so her role at Garrity is really to drive digital development in the right sector for the organization. So definitely reach out to Carolyn if you guys want to talk more about the tools that you guys are creating. And then I know that we're getting close to 5 o'clock, and I want to make sure to have a back and forth and engage with you on questions. But I wanted to just highlight a couple of other things with regard to the digital economy, with the goal of really still trying to bring you guys into the conversation around supporting digital development here in the Philippines, right? One of the things that is a bit concerning with digital tools and internet adoption is the fact that what we're seeing with regard to income inequality is that in terms of global income inequality, so basically between countries, we've seen a decline in global income inequality. And so this really has to do with the fact that you see large swaths of the population in China really growing. So the income inequality between countries is actually on decline. However, what we do observe is that within countries, this is across the board, within countries, we are witnessing an increase over the last few decades in income inequality within countries. And what's driving this? A lot of the research really points to technology and technology adoption. And I think even anecdotally, we can see this in the communities that we're operating in. What tends to happen with technology is it is a multiplier, right, of whatever it is you're trying to do and achieve, mostly on the malicious side. But that is really what's driving the increase in income inequality within countries, where you have populations that are really able to participate in production, in an economy because of the digital tools that they've adopted, and then you see populations who are not participating because of the lack of digital tools really sort of falling behind. So that's something that is really top of mind to folks in the international development community with regard to internet access, is the fact that we still see income inequality increasing within countries, and there are many downsides to digital technologies and the unchecked adoption of digital technologies. And I think that's really coming to the forefront these last few years, at least with how digital tools are being utilized in our political discourse back in the United States, as an example. But this is a chart also from the World Bank Development Report 2016 that really points out the risks associated with the pervasive spread of digital technology. That you can spread information without accountability, and so you think about the ability for political groups to use digital technologies to exert more control over constituencies. we talked a little bit about inequality and income inequality, but also with the spread of digital tools, particularly around automation, there's a potential for a hollowing out of the labor force, where you have low skilled, highly repetitive skills and positions that are highly repetitive, and basically substituted with robotics or even with machine learning. You see some of that threat to even things like the BPO industry here. And then concentration of wealth. And this is something we're really seeing with the big tech companies, particularly in the U.S. But the ability to concentrate resources, particularly when you have national monopolies like digital technologies tend to be, because there's very low cost of marketing cost for production once you have the initial product out there. So these are the downsides, and I just wanted to also highlight the sort of policy or analog complements that the World Bank also highlights. Right? And so I think this is important to recognize that because of the speed and the acceleration that digital tools allow you to go to market with and conduct activity, that these analog complements are all the more important. So this is really around regulatory policy, an environment that believes protecting consumers, so consumer protection policies, skills development, and this is a huge one. Workers, entrepreneurs, and making sure public servants all have the right skills, and then strong institutions that can check some of the new winners in the digital economies that we're seeing. So that's analog complements. And so, in closing, I just wanted to return to this question. And I know 30 minutes is a lot of time to really try and answer this particular question, but I hope that some of these points from these slides give you a little bit of pause to think about what really is the role of internet connectivity. Is it just something that's nice to have once everything else is fulfilled, or is it really something that we need to focus on as a community, particularly when it comes to agricultural development? I don't think the last point that I'll make for this particular audience is that if you're focusing on agricultural development, you tend to focus with the Department of Agriculture. But I think it's important to make sure that when it comes to supporting the development of an infrastructure layer that then feeds back into the work that you're trying to do around agriculture, that you engage with other parts and other peers. And so, this is a graphic that comes from the FAO agriculture strategy. And what I think is really important, what's really interesting about this is that it particularly articulates that for a national agriculture strategy, it's not just the ministries or the departments of ag that play a role here, but it's really working with the ministries of communication, ministries of IT. And so that's the sort of call to action that I would encourage you all to think about. I know there's been at least one or two times when Carol has come home from a meeting with peers at the Department of Ag, and they've remarked that there's very poor cellular connectivity in some of the areas where they're working. So that's something to get the Department of Ag folks talking to the DICT to say, we really need your help on building up the digital experience. So with that, I will end with this slide again, the long family history with UPLB and SEARCA. We hope that we're here and we can engage with you all here at SEARCA for a long time coming. And just wanted to share that there is a new chapter in the Garrity family story with SEARCA, and his name is Bayani Garrity, and he was born in June of this year. So there's one more Garrity to participate with SEARCA events in the future. So this is my email address. and contact information, and happy to take questions now and engage further. Thank you.
So we now open the floor for our audience comments, insights, or clarifications regarding the presentation. Kindly use the microphone and introduce yourself and the organization you represent or affiliate with. So you need the first one to ask the clarification. Yes.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Regine. I'm connected with the World Agroforestry Center, so I met your father. So if you have, we've been working with other farmers, smallholder farmers, what we found is that the main concerns are still basic, information and framework, technology, farm-to-work approach. So since they will be the end users of the technology of the connectivity, internet connectivity, or agriculture that we were talking about, how do we sell this to them? So how do we make them feel that they need internet connectivity?
Yeah, so I think one of the principles, and going back to the principles for digital development, one of the principles is really around understanding or designing the user, right? It's the first one. And so I think that's where you really sort of start when it comes to digital tools and trying to improve information delivery to farmers. And so in many cases, frankly, even in places like the United States, where you have 15 to 20% of the population who are not internet users, don't have mobile phones, there will always be that segment. And so I think the way that you start is you start with basic communications and reaching out to individuals to demonstrate the value of basic communications. And frankly, I think one of the reasons why the internet is growing so quickly is because people see a basic need in communication with family, right? So that's why Facebook is growing so rapidly. But I think you can't force technologies and you can't force applications and services on individuals. And so in many cases, it may not be the end user who you're trying to benefit this farms. It may not be those individuals who you're targeting with your services. It may be the next line of interaction with those individuals, be it agricultural extension services, be it other sort of farmers in the community who may be higher in the technology adoption curve. I think it really depends on at an individual level. But there are ways to introduce different types of technologies in a sort of step stool manner, so you're not just forcing a heavy data-driven application that requires an LTE or expensive smartphone.
Other clarifications or comments? You have one on basic.
SEARCA operates on the basis of 5-year plans. So we're nearing the end of our 10th 5-year plan, and we're initiating preparations for the 11th 5-year plan. And we were told by our governing board to start actively promoting agriculture 4.0 in line with the industrial revolution 4.0. And we feel that digital technology is really key to this. And it's just, I don't have a question, but just to thank you for opening our minds for their responsibilities of how this will be applied in the agriculture sector.
No, and I think that's great. I think a lot of organizations and institutions are recognizing the importance of digital tools, and it must be something that needs to be tackled and adopted in a very proactive manner. And so, coming from USAID, There has been a very big focus on digital tools. We talked to the folks in Manila at AED. They're really ramping up their activities around digital tools and a lot of the other multilaterals and donations. So, I would recommend the strategy team that is working on this 11 5-year plan to really reach out to others in the community who are working on the topic.
We have room for one or two more comments or clarifications. Mark? Okay, if you're shy right now in asking questions, please email John. And so that wraps up our open forum. Let us all